You're watching the Allegany College of Maryland's state and local government classes Maryland 6th Congressional District Democrat Debate, held March 24th at the Cumberland campus of Allegany College of Maryland, in conjunction with Frostburg State University's J. Glenn Beall Jr. Institute for Public Affairs and the Allegany College of Maryland Center for Continuing Education, in cooperation with the Garrett County Democrat Club and the Garrett and Allegany County Central Committees.
Thank you. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this afternoon's Congressional Forum for Maryland's 6th District for the United States Congress, being broadcast live on 1270 AM WCBC and online at WCBCradio.com. This forum will also be broadcast on Atlantic Broadband Channel 97 and Comcast Channel 3 at a later date. 13 candidates are vying for the 6th District congressional seat. That number will be reduced to 2 by the primary election on Tuesday, April the 3rd. We are here to learn more about each of the candidates so that we can make an educated choice on Election Day. I'd like to recognize the candidates for their decision to run for office. It takes courage and conviction to put your name on the ballot. Thank you for being here this afternoon. I'd like to extend a special thanks to all of the students from Allegany College's state and local governments class and participating students from Frostburg State University for their diligence in preparing for this event. The first part of our forum features the Democratic candidates, of which there are 5. The candidates are Mr. Charles Bailey, Mr. John Delaney, State Senator Robert Garagiola, Mr. Ronald Little, and Dr. Milad Paran. The candidates are seated in alphabetical order according to their last names. The order in which the candidates give their answers will rotate. The first shall be last for the next round of questions. The questions the candidates will answer this evening have been submitted by the state and local governments class of Allegany College of Maryland, the Frostburg State University's Beall Institute, the Allegany Democratic State Central Committee, the Greater Cumberland Committee, the Labor Council, and the students from Allegany College in collaboration with professors from Frostburg State and Allegany College. Every candidate will answer every question asked. Our panelists are students. Robert Mick is a political science major at Allegany College. He lives in Cumberland, Maryland. Cameron Kolwitz is a political science major at Allegany College from Prescott, Arizona. Katie Dignan is a political science major at Frostburg State. She resides in Cumberland. Latia Stanley is a graduate student in education at Frostburg State and has recently earned a degree in political science from Frostburg State. She also lives in Frostburg. Each candidate will have 2 minutes to answer the asked question. Please restrict your answers to the allotted time. You will be permitted to finish the sentence that you are speaking at the end of the allotted time. In fairness to all of the candidates, please do not begin a new sentence after your time has expired. A candidate will be provided an opportunity for a 1-minute rebuttal if his name is specifically mentioned in another candidate's response to a question. The rebuttal will be requested by waving a colored card provided to each candidate. In our final segment, you will have the opportunity to make a 2-minute closing statement. We will be taking 3 breaks in each hour, approximately every 20 minutes, and they will be 3 to 4 minutes each. We will begin with each candidate having 1 minute to introduce himself. Let us start with Mr. Bailey.
Check. Hello, my name is Charles Bailey. My name is Charles Bailey. Can you hear me all right in the back? I want you to know that this is a very important race for all of us. Very important decision here come Election Day in November. And this is a preliminary match between nominees for the Democrats. Your good vote is going to choose one of these members of this panel to be your nominee for the Democratic Party. I would urge you to listen to all of us, try to get a feel of our differences, and go by your gut, your heart, who you think is going to represent the working families of the 6th District. And that through our answers to your questions, we hope that you'll get a good understanding of each of our positions so you can make an informed decision. I myself am a single father. I'm a veteran a former assistant public defender, and in my work and in my life, I've seen what this man-made economic disaster has done to the young people among us and the people who are raising our family.
Thank you, Mr. Bailey.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm John Delaney, and thank you for having me here today. I'm a father of 4 daughters and married to April Delaney, who is a leader in the nonprofit world with a particular focus on media literacy. My campaign is about jobs. I'm a proven job creator. I started 2 businesses in Montgomery County, created over 1,000 jobs. My business has been given awards by the Obama administration for the way it's conducted itself and the services provide. My campaign is about new ideas and thinking into the future and looking into the future and having an independent-minded candidate who will do that, which is why the Washington Post has endorsed me, which is why President Bill Clinton has endorsed me, which is why people like Donna Edwards have endorsed me because of my commitment to families. And my campaign is about our future. And I believe I'm the right candidate to lead us into the future, both in terms of what the 6th District of Maryland needs and what our country needs. Thank you for having me, and I look forward to this afternoon.
Thank you, Mr. Delaney.
Good afternoon. I'm Rob Garrett. Thanks for hosting this forum here today. Background a little bit, worked on Capitol Hill, did a little advocacy on Capitol Hill, also served in the U.S. Army Reserve as a paratrooper. Been 10 years now as a Maryland state senator, and believe we have a lot of challenges ahead of us. Congressman Bartlett has not been a very effective representative for this area over the last 20 years. If you recall, when he was campaigning back in 1992, he talked about term limiting himself. In 2002, I term limited a 16-year incumbent Republican state senator, and I'm looking to do it again on November 6th with Congressman Bartlett. We've got a lot of challenges on the economic front, jobs front. I've been a proven leader in Annapolis on education, on healthcare, on energy, green technology, green jobs, economic development. These are the kinds of things we need to do at the federal level, and I'm looking to be that type of representative in Congress representing the 6th District. Look forward to the questions. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ron Little, and I look forward to being the nominee for Congress to face whatever Republican candidate comes out of their primary. I've said from the beginning that this campaign is about us. Us, the people that live the middle class, that work hard every day, that toe the line, that keep this country afloat, the people that have been the backbone of this society, the people that have been disappearing because they've not been heard. This campaign has always been about what we can do to improve our lives and the future of our children in this country. And I've started 14 years ago by making that contribution. No one else on this panel can say that they've committed their time and energy as a volunteer for 14 years fighting for women's rights, fighting for education, and fighting for parity at all levels of society. My name is Ron Little. I'm a citizen candidate. I'm your advocate, and I look forward to being that advocate in November. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Little. Dr. Perron is on his way, and I suggest that we move on with the questions, and Dr. Perron can introduce himself when he gets here. The first question will be for candidate Delaney, and Mr. Kolwitz will ask it.
The creation of a north-south highway corridor has been a longtime dream of many in our community. Would you support such a project even if such money were considered a federal earmark?
Yes, I would support such a project because I think investing in transportation, investing in our transportation infrastructure is one of the most important things we can be doing as a country. I've talked about on my campaign how one of the president's proposal that I think is most effective and most constructive is his proposal to put forth an infrastructure bank, which he's laid out very clearly on several occasions. And the reason that is important because in terms of short-term and long-term job creation, investing in our infrastructure, whether it be our transportation infrastructure, which you reference, or our communication infrastructure, or our energy infrastructure, is one of the most important things we can do as a country. It'll get Americans back to work in the short term with jobs that raise the standard of living on average, and it'll lay the groundwork, most importantly, for our future. The industries of our future require a well thought through and efficient transportation network. The industries of our future need an efficient communications background, And the industries of our future need efficient energy sources and access to energy in an affordable way that saves Americans money. And this is what an infrastructure bank can do for us. One of the things that's going on in this country right now is corporations and banks are sitting on an enormous amount of cash. There's more cash on the balance sheets of corporations than there's ever been in the history of this country. And there's more cash in banks than there's ever been in the history of this country. And one of the areas many private investors like corporations and banks want to invest in is infrastructure. But there's no efficient way for them to do that. What the president has proposed is a public-private partnership around infrastructure that allows the government, which is central to the role of government, to control the infrastructure, determine how it's built, determine where it's located, and determine the manner in which it's delivered, but also will work in partnership with the private sector to put a lot of that capital to work. It's a terrific solution, and it's consistent with some of these ideas. Thank you.
As I've been up in Cumberland numerous times, I've heard from many in the business community about the importance of this roadway, and you can bet that I would be supportive of it. I think it's a shame that this Congress, on two occasions, one, in trying to reauthorize the Republicans on the House side, seeking to reauthorize the transportation program, sought to reduce transportation funding by 30%. President Obama had part of his jobs bill last year. Part of that was investment in our roads, bridges, and transit. And again, the Republican Congress decided not to move that legislation forward, even though there was aspects of that that would have paid for that funding. I believe strongly that investing in our roads, our bridges, our transit, our transportation infrastructure is critical. It's critical for two reasons. One, it's critical because many of those sectors, engineers, construction, aggregates industries and whatnot, those areas have seen some of the highest unemployment in the country. And the private sector's not hiring those people. There's not a lot of activity going on in that sector. This is where the government can step in. And frankly, I believe that spending, federal spending, on roads, bridges, and transit, such as the North-South Corridor road, is a critical investment to get people back to work today. It's also a critical investment for the long-term future. It's an investment that we can enjoy for 20, 30 years. This is something that I think that, from an economic standpoint, economic development, but also a quality of life. So I would absolutely support that and think we need to do much more on that front. Thank you.
I too support the North-South Corridor. I think it's important that we recognize that, as we try to position ourselves as, a robust region for new businesses and economic opportunities, that businesses that transplant here want to know that they have access to resources that make their business profitable. That means roadways for ingress and egress. That means access for people who are commuting. But that access doesn't have to be limited to a North-South Corridor roadway. We talk about light rail or extending the MARC train further west so that people can maybe get off the roadways, using existing rail lines to put trucks off, take trucks off the road and allow them to use the existing rail system so that we can reduce our carbon emissions and reduce our impact on the environment. That's just one of the ways that we can do that. And President Obama has, his 2013 budget has said, look, the way that we rebuild the middle class is to provide jobs. And one of the surest ways that we can provide jobs in this country is to provide jobs for people building infrastructure projects. Roads, bridges. Maryland has some of the most less than pleasant bridges. I'm trying to be polite, but a lot of our bridges are near decay. Those are infrastructure projects that we can realize right away. And it's been like that for more than 20 years, again, due to neglect from our existing congressmen. We have opportunities here. We just need to coalesce and figure out the best way to do it.
Thank you so much, Mr. Little. Could you pass the microphone to Mr. Bailey? Thank you.
Thank you. I would like to answer by saying I'm not so sure. I think it's a good idea, but I believe it's a reaching back to the past instead of reaching forward to the future. I think there should be a balanced approach to transportation to include new ideas, light rail, commuter busing. I'm not sure about this corridor. It might be something that's been needed for generations, but I think that it should be a balanced approach with an idea of moving away from fossil fuels and lessening our dependence on foreign oil to become a freer nation. And I think that a new technology approach would be supportive of the idea of finding alternative ways than building another highway. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Thank you, Mr. Bailey. Thank you, Dr. Perron. You're now here. The candidates were given the ability to make a 1-minute statement. Are you ready to do something like that, or would you like to answer the question, the first question?
I'll do whatever you want me to do.
Can we have you make a 1-minute statement?
Certainly. First of all, I apologize for being late. Traffic down in the new part of the 6th District was absolutely atrocious with a little bit of rain. And then my campaign manager got pulled over speeding here. But once the state trooper found out that I was a Democrat in Western Maryland, he actually let us go with a warning. So it was very good. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Milad Puran. I'm from Jefferson, Maryland. I'm a doctor, and for the last 13 years, I've been a proud member of the United States military. I came to America when I was 6 years old because my parents had a vision to give me a chance at freedom and then an opportunity to succeed in life. And I'm running for Congress because I refuse to accept the end of that American dream that brought my family here. I'm running for Congress because too many of us are struggling to find meaningful work. I'm running because our education system is no longer a ladder into the middle class for millions of Americans. I'm running to fix a tax system that shelters those who can most afford to pay their fair share.
Dr. Perron,
thank you.
Mr. Kolwitz can ask you the first question, and then we'll be all caught up.
Okay.
The creation of a north-south highway corridor has been a long-time dream of many in our community. Would you support such a project even if such money were considered a federal earmark?
I look at this area and I look at the way Senator Byrd took care of West Virginia, and I see the benefits that I see in Martinsburg from all the works and efforts that he put into it. I very much would support a north-south corridor in this part of the community. And when I was a medical student and a resident, I did area health in Cumberland. And let me tell you, one of my goals was to go to McHenry and ski as often as I could. Now, I hardly ever made it because I worked really hard and the learning was great and the hours were long. But if there had been a corridor, I think, especially with areas down in Cumberland, I think if we can connect that to the rest of Maryland, it's a great tourism area. I think that would actually be funds that would be very well spent for not only the people in this district, but also for the entire state, and really open up the West to the rest of the D.C. metro area and Baltimore area. So thank you, I would.
Thank you, Dr. Perron. This seems like a good time to take a break. So we're going to take a short break and we'll return right after these messages.
Allegany College of Maryland's Cumberland campus is a beautiful place to learn and live. Friendly faces provide a personal touch and a welcoming atmosphere. We are Allegany College of Maryland.
Our next question is going to come from Katie Dignan, and it's directed to Senator Garagiola.
One of the biggest questions we face as a nation is to balance our national budget and reduce our national debt. What steps would you take, if any, to reduce the federal budget and debt? Please be specific.
Thank you, Katie, for the question. I believe that the Republicans have been very successful in how they frame the debate in Washington. And I think that often, to me, it's as if they had an epiphany, because during the Bush administration, if you recall, in the 2000 election, there were surpluses, and he inherited surpluses. And during the period of time when he was president, for those six of the 8 years, it was a Republican-controlled Congress. They reduced taxes for the very affluent. They got us into 2 wars, and they essentially ballooned the deficit. They had surpluses and they went to deficit. President Obama started out his presidency inheriting 2 wars and inheriting a deficit. Those Republicans were talking nothing about the deficit at all during those 8 years of the Bush administration. Now, clearly we need to address it. 9 of the 10 years that I've been in Annapolis, and we're working on the budget still in Annapolis, I voted for balanced budgets. I believe we need to balance our budget. But I do believe that the real focus needs to be about growing our economy and jobs. If we can get more people back to work, more people paying taxes, that's gonna provide more revenues for our coffers. If we get more small businesses hiring people, more revenues into the coffers from those small businesses. We need to balance our budget clearly. One of the first things that I would do to balance the budget is the tax cuts, the Bush tax cuts, for the very wealthy, the top 1%. those need to expire. And if we let those expire, that's going to put a big dent in our federal budget. But I think first and foremost, rather than focusing on that, I think we get on a glide path to reducing our federal budget. We need to focus on growing our economy. We need to focus on jobs. We need to move the president's jobs bill, which makes investment in transportation like we talked about before. We need to pass President Obama's jobs bill to get firefighters, teachers, police back on the streets. There are a number of elements to that, and we need to focus on that. That should be the primary focus, and that's what I'm going to focus on as a member of Congress. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Garagiola. Mr. Little?
Fixing the nation's economic problems is a multifaceted task. Again, that means people have to be working so that we can have more money available at the tax base. That also means tax reform across the board. That means reducing money that's set aside as corporate loopholes, making sure that offshore dollars that are earned by U.S. corporations is taxed at the same rate as the dollars are that are taxed by those corporations that earn dollars here. That also means reducing defense spending. Our defense spending is the largest portion of the federal budget. And I would submit that reducing it to 17 to 18% of its current level will give us significant enough savings. Also, bring our troops home. Bringing our troops home will allow us to save expenditures that are currently residing in other countries. We're spending a lot of time standing up democracies and standing up countries all around the world when the one that we have here is starting to fall apart. We need to be responsible for ourselves before we can be responsible for the rest of the world. And yes, we can do other things to make sure that the rest of the world thrives and sees democracy survive, but it doesn't mean that it has to be on the backs of those who are already struggling. We can be creative. And one of those ways that we can be creative is, to stop having them feel like it's okay to just count on us for financial resources. So that's the way I think we reduce the budget. Reduce defense spending, get people back to work, bring our soldiers home. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Little. Dr. Perrin?
Thank you. So the deficit and the budget, whenever I think about the deficit, we look at it in two separate ways. There's capital spending, which is invested in infrastructure, which is invested in things like our education system. If you buy a $200,000 home and you make $50,000 a year, we don't call that deficit spending because you know that over the life of the 30-year loan that your house will pay for that. And so we have to really, in this country, break down what are operational costs and what are capital costs. And there is room to break down, to decrease operational costs. But first and foremost, what we need to do is to redesign our entire tax code system, because frankly, our tax code system punishes those of us who work the hardest. The first thing I would do is make sure that the Bush tax cuts for the wealthiest in this country expire, because that really is the cause of this deficit. Then our country has been in almost 11 years of unfunded wars. These wars have been run on a surplus budget, and Congress needs to not be derelict in its duty, and it needs to actually fund these things appropriately and then to have the appropriate taxes to pay for them. One other thing that we can do is to drive down speculation within the markets is to have a surcharge tax on all the transactions that happen in Wall Street. So there's a lot of microsecond transactions happen that drive up our prices on commodities and so on and so forth. Well, if we actually tax that, a small fraction of the cost, that would actually help pay down the deficit. It would help us balance our budget, and it would alleviate the need of trying to do this on the backs of the middle class, trying to do this on the backs of those who are relying on our entitlements.
Thank you, Dr. Perrin. Mr. Bailey can answer the question about the federal budget and debt next.
Thank you. With all due respect to these national questions, I want to be upfront with you that I would be an unashamed partisan for the 6th District first. I think we should end all these wars where young lives and $2 billion a month are spent overseas to rebuild economies on the other side of the world is absurd. When we need to rebuild the economy here in the 6th District. Let the tax cuts lapse, perhaps reform taxation again altogether. But my priority is going to be right here in the 6th District, bringing jobs. Then I'll start worrying about the national issues like the debt and deficit spending. I also believe fervently that it's healthy for a country to invest in its people at any time, even if there's a deficit. Deficit spending can be a positive thing at this time and is needed. We need an emergency medical treatment for the 6th District economy. My colleague, Dr. Perrin, has combat doctor, he would understand what that means. Yet he's not talking about the 6th District. He's talking about the nation. What we need is a champion of the 6th District, someone who's going to go in there without shame as a partisan for these people who need work now, who need to find jobs now. And we need deficit spending now here to encourage, to spark economic development like priming a pump on a farm. And if you could do that with a pump, you could do it with the economy, we're going to have revenues like you would never believe. And that's how you raise the tax base. That's how you work your way out of a recession. Start with the worker. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bailey. The last person to answer this question will be Mr. John Delaney.
Thank you, and thank you for the question, Katie. It's a very good question, and I think in answering the question, we have to put it in context. And the context of our deficit is really a question of, do we want to make investments in our future? Because as long as we allow our long-term structural deficit to grow, with each passing year, we put the country in a worse position to be able to invest in education and to invest in infrastructure and to invest in the kind of things we need for our future. That's why this question is important. This is not a philosophical or intellectual question. This is about whether we want to make investments, because as long as our deficit grows, it puts us in a very difficult position to make investments, and we have the kind of pressure we're dealing with now. And a good example of this is what's going on with the federal workers, right, particularly in this state here in Maryland, where their pay is getting squeezed, in my judgment, unfairly. And the reason that's happening is because we're not dealing with the deficit in context. What happens is we don't touch any of the big levers in the deficit, like tax reform. And I, like everyone on this panel, is in favor of tax reform and raising taxes on wealthier Americans. Because we don't deal with defense, and because we don't deal with the other big aspects of our budget and our deficit, we end up squeezing the discretionary part of the budget, and that is a great example of what's happening to federal workers. So this is incredibly important to do. And to give a specific answer to your question in terms of what specifically I would be in favor of, I thought Simpson-Bowles was a very constructive solution. It wasn't perfect. I'm a big believer that perfect's the enemy of the good, but it represented broad-based compromise, and it moved us in the right direction. And it was consistent with, I think, some of the leadership the president has showed. And I think he showed extraordinary leadership in putting that council together, which was bipartisan. And if you looked at the people on that council, they were actually doing this for the right reasons. Most of them were at the end of their political career. Politics didn't matter anymore. They were trying to do the right thing. So I was supportive of that. Thank you for the question.
Thank you, Mr. Delaney. The next question will be asked to Mr. Ron Little, and Mr. Robert Mick from Cumberland will ask it.
In your opinion, what role does organized labor play in our society today? As a member of Congress, would you oppose or support legislation to make it more difficult to form a union?
I think organized labor plays a very critical role in how employees function in this society. My mother was a union employee. My mother is still, to some degree, a union employee, even though she's disabled, but she relies on benefits and she relies on her union leadership to still advocate on her behalf. The union has brought us, better standards in terms of, worker care, worker safety, OSHA, MOSHA. These are the things that were often neglected and, to some degree, are the result of the economic issues that we face in this country now, because companies are allowed to send jobs overseas where those standards don't have to be met. I'd like to think that, and I've said on many occasions before, a healthy America is a prosperous America. A safe America is a vibrant America. And I think our unions have worked hard to make sure that there's safety and security in the workplace. So I would fight anyone's efforts to squelch that ability, for people to form, join, or otherwise participate in unions. I think they serve a very critical function in our nation, and I think it's demonstrated by what we see around the world, not just in terms of how many jobs leave here, but in terms of the tragedies we see or hear about around the world with, people dying or, suffering, great injustices in their workplace. So I'm a big advocate for unions, unionization, and worker safety, and yes, I would fight anybody, willing to, or anyone, fighting to make sure that those standards, are decreased or eliminated completely.
Thank you, Mr. Little. Dr. Perron?
First and foremost, you would never get a more staunch advocate for the rights of workers to organize than me. My wife is a pediatric critical care nurse, and she's part of a nurses' union. Let me tell you what practical roles union plays in your everyday lives. Because of her union, in her hospital, an ICU nurse cannot take care of more than 3 patients. That's not because the nurses can't do it, but it's not safe for the patients. What's interesting is that not a single hospital in our district has union nurses. That's somewhat shameful to me. But because of the standards that unions have set in those hospitals, because of standards they have set for patient care numbers, because of the standards they have set for working hours, that nurses can't work for more than 4 12-hour shifts in a row, that translates to national policies and national guidelines which help make all of us safer when we go to our hospitals. Unions have done tremendous things to make our workplaces safer, not just in the hospital, but everywhere. We have needleless syringes now because of efforts of our nursing unions. We have minimum wage standards, and we have a robust middle class in this country because of our unions. Many of my generation are leaving college with hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt and entering a workforce that frankly isn't there to help them pay off that debt. We need more union jobs, more well-paying, good benefit union jobs in this country to build back our middle class. I will fight every day in Washington for the rights of organized labor and for individual employees to be able to organize and form unions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Perrin. Mr. Bailey, the question was about unions.
Thank you. Yes, labor unions in the current paradigm we have now are very important. I believe that the free choice bill will be introduced to Congress again this year that would make it remove the possibility for the employers to have time to intimidate people trying to organize labor in their workshops. So I would support that. Also, I would look forward and think about possibly consider changing the matrix, the dynamic between employer and employee, perhaps using the UPS model where the employees have a stake, stock options, they have a stake in the outcome. That changes the dynamic tremendously. That could be factored into union negotiations, and so that the unions would be happier because they have more compensation. Management would be happier because they have employees that have a stake in the outcome. This way, the whole dynamic changes. It's not antagonistic. It's working together. It's something to consider. But until then, I know that's off in the future. But until then, I would consider supporting the Free Choice Act as it is to be introduced in Congress. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bailey. Mr. Delaney.
Thank you for the question, Robert. This is an issue that is important to me both from a personal and also from a philosophical or policy perspective. I come from a union family. My father was a union electrician. He's still a member of his union after 60 years, and his union gave me money to go to college. And but for that union, and I still remember standing up in that union hall and thanking those workers and looking at them after they gave me this award every year and saying to myself, these people didn't have the opportunity I had, so they understood the future. But from a policy perspective, I have kind of 3 views on it. First of all, I clearly support a worker's right to organize, and I think unions are incredibly important. And the reason they're important is because we're a free market economy, and that's one of the great things about our country. And unions are an important check on a free market because the natural influences of a free market require that we have checks on the different stakeholders in business, and unions are incredibly important for that. I think they're also important for some of the reasons Malad mentioned, which is they've clearly raised the safety standards across all industries they've touched, and that's been very, very important for the safety of American workers, whether they're union or non-union. But third, and I think this is the part that we don't talk about enough, and I think unions really need to be put in a different perspective as it relates to this concept, which is the concept of worker training and skills training, particularly technical training. Because as we think about our industries of the future and as we think about the skills that workers are going to need, I think unions play an incredibly important role in worker training and keeping our workforce at a cutting edge. Again, I remember as a child, I used to ask my dad why some electricians were union and some were non-union, and he used to say, well, the good ones are union. I mean, obviously there was a little self-interest there, but kind of if you looked at where they worked, the bigger, more complicated jobs were always the union workers. And I think it's an important point in terms of the skills that unions can help workers obtain and maintain those skills so we keep our country at a cutting edge. So I think it's a very important question. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Delaney. Senator Garagiola.
Thank you. Over the last 20 years or so, I would say, we've seen the middle class actually seeing its income decline and wealth decline. I mean, it's no secret. And I think labor is fighting for the middle class. And I think that myself, I've been a proven leader in Annapolis on behalf of labor, on behalf of collective bargaining, seeking to expand collective bargaining. We need to do something where we're not seeing a consolidation of wealth in the very few, the 1%. We're seeing a consolidation of wealth in very few corporations. Labor can play a balancing role in that. I'm proud to say that I've been endorsed by the AFL-CIO. I'm proud to say that I've been endorsed by Progressive Maryland. I've been proud to say that I've been endorsed by MoveOn.org and a number of other labor unions. I've been a fighter the last 10 years in Annapolis for the middle class and for working families. This Congress has gone in a different direction. Again, the last 20 years, I think we've seen a decline. We've seen the ladder to success, the bottom rungs of that ladder, breaking and people sliding backwards. I think it's been more acute with the recession, and this Congress, particularly this Republican Congress that's been hijacked by the Tea Party, they have done nothing to advance working families. We've seen bailouts of the big banks, but nothing for Main Street. We've seen bailouts for big businesses, but nothing for Main Street. This Congress has not been focusing on the middle class, and I plan to do that as a member of Congress. I've got the support of a number of organizations that speak to what I've done in Annapolis and what I'll do as a member of Congress. So definitely we'll support labor, we'll support organizing labor, have a consistent record in doing that, and we'll continue to do that as a member of Congress for this district. Thank you.
I think this is a good time to take a break for WCBC Radio, and we'll come back with a very important question for this area from Ms. Stanley.
In today's economy, everyone is watching the bottom line. Our low tuition rates combined with scholarships and numerous financial aid options help make a college education affordable. We are Allegany College of Maryland.
We're about to hear from Latia Stanley, thank you, and she's a student at Frostburg State, and she's going to ask a question of Dr. Perrin.
Hello. Natural gas exploration in the Marcellus Shale could provide the opportunity to create jobs in Western Maryland while decreasing our dependence on foreign sources of energy. Do you support fracking? And what would you do, if anything, to decrease America's dependence on foreign oil?
Thank you, Latia. So when we look at energy, we always look at energy from an economic standpoint. But I think it's also very important to look at energy from the prism of an environmental standpoint. And I think that's where the question of hydraulic fracturing or fracking comes into play. Look, Fukushima, 3 Mile Island, the BP oil spill in the Gulf, those things weren't supposed to happen, right? Those were failures of systems that really show us how unstable and how insecure our energy sources are. You know, a despot in the Middle East decides that he's having a bad day and our oil prices go up because of it. So when we look at our energy sources and when we look at our energy security, we have to have a broad and diverse investment in energy. And that also includes things like natural gas and fossil fuels, because for the foreseeable future, our economy will continue to be dependent on fossil fuels. Now, with respect to hydraulic fracturing, there's a lot of things that go in the ground, and there's no reason that those products can't be disclosed to the state and the federal government to make sure that they're safe for the environment. What the companies say in terms of, well, these are private practices, these are tricks of the trade, we don't want to, you know what, the FDA looks at manufactured drugs, it looks at secret information all the time. This is what the government does to make sure that public safety exists. Once we do that, I would be in support of allowing for hydraulic fracturing so long as the local officials and the federal government believe that it was safe for the area, and that, again, from the environmental perspective and the economic perspective. Look, we went into World War II with Springfield rifles, and most of the cavalry was still riding horses. Our country believed that that was an important investment, and we came out of World War II flying B-29s, and we had the nuclear bomb. Energy is the same way. It doesn't mean because we're at point A that we can't be in a really good place when we get to point B and get there quickly. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Perrin. Mr. Bailey, there's a question on the table about Marcellus Shale.
I'm glad there's a freeze right now because it's not safe. It's also bad for the environment, but it's also not safe. We have to have a balanced approach. True, we can explore domestic production of traditional fuels like natural gas, oil. We must have a balance with a forward view, looking to new technologies. I think you can have that balance, but it has to be done safely for the citizens. I think there were reports of natural gas coming out of people's spigots, blowing up in their face while they're doing dishes due to fracking. But we also have to have environmental concerns as well. And this can be done by a balanced approach. It's not a thumbs up or thumbs down. It means more development, more understanding, more learning about the process and what it does to our citizens as well as our environment. And we also have to weigh those against spending the same investment dollars on new technologies, training new workers for the new 6th District. As long as we have a focus on the future, I think we can gather up some of our traditional resources to get us there, to make the bridge. But I don't like the idea of relying on fossil fuels for the long term. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bailey. Mr. Delaney?
Thanks for the question. And to be directly responsive to your question, then provide some broader views. While it is a Wild West out there in terms of what's going on with fracking right now, I am supportive of fracking because I haven't seen any evidence to indicate that it can't be done in a safe and sound way. But for it to be done in a safe and sound way, we need to empower the EPA to have the tools to regulate and enforce the rules that we do have in place. And the EPA used to have those rules, but the Congress passed some laws. One of them is actually called the Halbritton exemption to take away the power of the EPA to do some of these things. So we need to power the federal government to regulate, monitor, and to have accountability around how this is done. But with that caveat, I am supportive of fracking because I think it creates enormous opportunity for us to continue down the path of energy independence. One of the things I've talked a lot about on this campaign is the need for a national energy policy that appropriately prices and costs for all of our different sources of energy so that we can move to a place where we have energy independence and we're using the type of sources of production that we want. I also believe this energy policy should focus heavily on conservation and efficiency, because even more so than dealing with the production side, if we can make this country more efficient and make advances as it relates to storage, we can move ourselves to an entirely different place from an energy independence perspective and from an environmental perspective and from a jobs perspective. I believe these things are all interrelated, and I think a national energy policy is one of the most important things we can do as a country, and every citizen of this country should know where we want to be in 20 years as it relates to energy production, energy regulation, and energy efficiency and storage. It can truly change our lives, and it's one of the things that I'm most focused on as part of my run for Congress. But it's a really good question, and I do support fracking, provided it's done with federal oversight. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Delaney. Senator Garagiola, the question is about fracking for Marcellus Shale.
Great, thank you. I think it's without dispute that we all want safe drinking water. We all want clean streams. At the same time, recognizing that there are a lot of jobs potentially with this as well. We're seeing that in other states. I mean, right now we have a moratorium in Maryland, and I think that we need to make sure that before we go down that road that we're doing it in a safe manner, because if there is an environmental problem or if there is an issue that affects our drinking water, you can't undo that. Now, many look at natural gas as the bridge energy source, and I think it is as well. I think it's critical that we as a country become energy independent. I think it's critical that as a country that we have an energy policy, and we haven't done that. I've been a leader in Annapolis on the green and renewable energy front, working on legislation now that I'd like to do at the federal level, that if it's enacted in Annapolis, it's about 10,000 new jobs in the solar energy industry. We've seen a growth of about 2,000 jobs in that industry to date over the last 5 years. There are solar installers in every county in this district, jobs that weren't here several years ago. We need to have an energy independent policy. I believe that we need to make sure that before we move forward on fracking, that it's done in a safe manner. I think that studying it is something that we need to do. And before we embark on that we make sure that we're doing it in a manner that ensures safe drinking water and safe streams. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Garagiola. Mr. Little?
We do have evidence that fracking, for the most part, has not been done safely. We have evidence in Wyoming. We have evidence in the Hopi Land territories. We have evidence in Ohio. We also have a history of this country of relying on finite resources, whether it's natural gas or it's oil. What we fail to realize is that as a country, from the ground up, we are infinitely capable in terms of innovation. Why focus on the finite resources when we can work on the things that are infinite, like wind power, solar energy? The BP solar plant is sitting empty right now. And just recently, a Japanese company was looking for some place to partner with to build solar panels. And rather than use the BP solar facility, they partnered with a facility in Ohio. That's a missed opportunity for us. Those are jobs that are gone. That's a failure of our existing leadership. I don't support fracking. And I don't support fracking because I think the impact on the environment potentially is too great. We do have an opportunity to be energy independent, but we can do so by being innovative and creative and focusing on other ways to restore, or to have energy independence in this country that don't rely on us to dig or drill or to make a mess of the environment. That's what I would encourage us to do. And you want to talk about job creation? That's where we create jobs. We invest money in people looking to explore those technologies. We provide money to universities that are willing to do the research. That's how we innovate, and that's how we become energy independent.
Thank you so much, Mr. Little. The next question will be for candidate Charles Bailey, and Mr. Cameron Kolwitz will ask it.
There has been a lot of discussion recently regarding Iran's development of nuclear technology. If you are elected to Congress, what steps would you take to address this situation, if any at all?
I believe that Iran cannot have technology that leads to the bomb. They could have safe technology if they would let UN inspectors in. That would be one thing, but they're not. So question is what I would do. I don't believe in a first strike. I think right now the multilateral talks and sanctions are the best way to go. I think that six nations in the area, are involved in working this out with Iran. I'd like to encourage that. And I think the real question lurking behind Mr. Kolwitz's question is that if Israel goes ahead and strikes, what are we going to do for our ally? Well, I can promise you now, no boots on the ground. I think we have developed an excellent technology, remote bombing with these drones, unmanned drones. And I would supporting our ally with those and work on accuracy. But no first strike, no boots on the ground. Not from the United States, not anymore. We're going to bring our boys and girls home from these wars and realize a peace dividend that would make developing new technologies and developing the economy in the 6th District a lot easier. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bailey. Mr. John Delaney.
Thank you, Cameron, for the question. So I think the president has really struck the right balance in his handling of this situation, and I think it's actually been one of the president's finest hours in terms of foreign relations and foreign affairs. And to frame it the way he's framing it, he's made it very clear that containment is not an option. Right? So we will not tolerate Iran having nuclear capabilities and just be comfortable containing it. But he's also made it very clear that devastating sanctions and political pressure has to be applied, and we have to be patient with respect to that to make sure that that works. And the other thing that I think the president has done, which I applaud, is he's made this issue both about our important ally in the Middle East, Israel, right? In which they may have a different approach to the way our time frame is. And he's shown his clear support for them, and he's made it clear that the military option is on the table because containment is not an option. But he's also made it clear, and he's made the case in a very compelling way, that this is not just an issue for Israel. This is an issue for the whole world. And I believe he's raised the stakes here, and he has the international community focused on this the way they need to and making progress the way they need to. Because as the president has said, is if Iran has nuclear capabilities, then every country in the Middle East will need and require nuclear capabilities in their own political judgment. And that is a horrific scenario for the world. And I think he's done a very good job framing that. which doesn't mean he's not fully supportive of Israel, which doesn't mean he hasn't said that the military option's on the table, which doesn't mean he hasn't said containment is not an option. He's done all those things. But he's also lifted the discussion up beyond the U.S.-Israel alliance, which I think is the absolute right balance to hit. I think it's why the Prime Minister of Great Britain, in his recent visit to the United States, really applauded the President for his leadership in this issue. So I'm highly supportive of the tack the President has taken. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Delaney. Senator Garagiola.
Great, thank you. I think this actually ties a little bit to the last question as well. I mean, if we didn't have to rely on foreign oil from Iran, that would turn off their economic spigot right there. You know, we're, in a sense, you know, fueling them. We're, in a sense, fueling them. I would say that, you know, the sanctions that the President has put forward, we need to give them time to work. We need to look at diplomacy, clearly. I think that it's a despicable and irrational regime in Iran. They're not good to their own people, and I fear that if they do develop nuclear weapons, that we need to address that. So, you know, it seems that we have time right now to allow sanctions to work. We have opportunity right now to work with our world community in clamping down further, and that's occurring. We have opportunity for multilateral talks. I think we need to continue that as well. But if we have good intelligence, and I'm not talking about like the intelligence we had with respect to Iraq, where we invaded a country on false intelligence, and I'm not talking about even invading Iran, but I do think if we have good intelligence that they have nuclear weapon capability, I fear that's destabilizing in the Middle East, but it's also a risk for the United States as well. And I would not oppose a missile strike to take out that nuclear capability. I think as a last resort, we need to keep that option on the table. But diplomacy, sanctions, it appears that they are having some impact. We need to give it more time first. But I don't think we should rule out a military option. Not putting boots on the ground, but I think that a military option should be on the table with respect to this question. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Senator Garagiola. Mr. Little, the question is about Iran.
I don't know if I necessarily took that question to mean, what do we do about Iran having nuclear weapons capability? But I'll answer it both ways. Maybe Iran itself is tired of, you know, dependence on foreign oil, and maybe they wanted to, you know, maybe they want to develop nuclear as an alternative energy source. I don't know. But Iran being nuclear warfare capable is not a good situation for anybody. The question of, you know, whether or not we strike first, or, you know, at what point do we strike, I think that really becomes an issue at the moment. You know, do we wait until they have a weapon pointed at someone? Do we wait till they actually launch? You know, if we go in and preemptively bomb, you know, and destroy the Strait of Hormuz, all that's going to do is drive, you know, oil prices, you know, through the ceiling. I mean, we've seen it already, you know, with Iraq. That it didn't work. You know, so it depends on what our agenda is. You know, are we focused on, you know, securing more oil resources? Are we focused on, you know, worldwide security? And I think, you know, I'm not going to stand up here and say, you know, if Iran, you know, if Iran starts a launch sequence, then it's time for us to strike, because I don't know. I'm not going to say that simply developing nuclear weapons is enough for us to strike, because you could develop all you want and maybe you just storm in a bunker. You know, do we want to pigeonhole ourselves into saying this is the line in the sand and this is what we do as a result? I'm going to tell you, I'm going to be honest. For me, that question won't be answered until I'm sitting in Congress and somebody says to me, here's where we are, Ron, what do you think we should do? And I think that's the only fair way to look at it.
Thank you so much, Mr. Little. Dr. Paran?
So, as many of you know, I was born in Iran. I left when I was 6. So this is an issue that actually I have a lot of ideas on and thoughts on. There's a regime in Iran that really is the problem. And everything else around this regime is the suffocating smoke. They're the fire. And everything that we do in the United States must be towards removing this regime from power. Frankly, they don't respect their own people, much less nuclear technology. I don't trust them with a slingshot. But here's the issue, and I think us Democrats, we need to be very smart about this. So drones will not work in Iran. These are hardened facilities you need heavy bombs, which also means that you need boots on the ground to paint that stuff up for the guys who are flying overhead. Also, there's not one site, there's not two sites, there's probably hundreds of sites, which means you need to have thousands of sorties, you need to take out anti-air, you need to take out anti-missiles. This is Air War College 101, which I just finished. Which basically means we also need to then secure the Straits of Hormuz, which actually probably means an invasion army of 30,000 people. So going into Iran is not a benign first strike, let's put a missile on a target. It's not Libya, it's not Iraq, it's a full invasion army. So we have to consider where that red line is. When we talk about a red line, it's a red line because there's no mistake. We all look at it and go, that's a red line. The red line is if they attack our allies, or they attack assets of the United States, or they attack our troops, that to me right now is the only clear line that's been laid, that red line that's been laid down. Now, Israel is a sovereign nation. They're our dearest ally. And the Israelis have to take into account where their own red line is. And I hope that they do that in consultation with us, and that we can then have not a unilateral but a multilateral, multinational state approach to this. But I think this is an issue that we need to confront and we need to be very sophisticated about as Democrats when we deal with it. Thank you.
Western Maryland, I hope you're listening because we're having a great time here today. That was our first hour. We'll be right back after these messages.
An Allegany College of Maryland education helps open doors in the job market. 100% of employers of ACM alumni said that they are likely or highly likely to hire additional ACM grads. We are Allegany College of Maryland.
You're watching the Allegany College of Maryland's state and local government classes Maryland 6th Congressional District Democrat Debate, held March 24th at the Cumberland campus of Allegany College of Maryland, in conjunction with Frostburg State University's J. Glenn Beall Jr. Institute for Public Affairs and the Allegany College of Maryland Center for Continuing Education, in cooperation with the Garrett County Democrat Club and the Garrett and Allegany County Central Committees.
The next question will be for candidate Delaney, and Katie Dignan will ask it.
Many states have recently adopted laws that are in conflict with federal law, such as legalizing marijuana for medical use and allowing same-sex marriages. What do you feel is the appropriate role of Congress in passing laws that may be in conflict with states' rights under the 10th Amendment?
Well, I think this is an issue that this country has debated since its formation, and I suspect it'll be an issue that this country will debate for a very long time. So once again, you've shown the good insight with your questions, Katie, by coming up with this one. So look, I think it obviously depends on the issue, and these are very tricky constitutional questions. As it relates to the two questions, so it's probably easier for me to talk about in the context of the two questions you've asked. I'm a strong supporter in allowing for same-sex marriage. I would love to figure out a role for the federal government to put forth legislation to allow that to happen nationally, because I think it is it's consistent with what we've done as a country, right, which is as we've advanced as a country and as we've recognized greater human rights, been embraced diversity, right, had a standard of fairness, justice, and equality, as we've watched our country kind of tackle these issues and always come out of these issues on the right side of it, although not as quickly as some of us would like, we've seen how our country has improved. And I think in the fullness of time, we'll look back at this issue and we'll say to ourselves, well, what were we even debating? So as someone in Congress, I'd like to be a leader in putting forth legislation that allows people to marry whoever they want to marry, because that's not my decision. I think it's their right to make that decision. So I'm supportive of same-sex marriage. As it relates to legalizing marijuana for medical use, I think we actually have someone on this panel who can give a more intelligent answer than I can on this. So I will actually defer to one of my fellow candidates to give a more reasoned answer. But based on the information I've looked at, the data would suggest to me that it is appropriate. So I would be supportive. And again, this is a tricky issue as to whether the federal government can actually put forth something in place. And I seem to believe it could based on this specific issue. I think it actually might be easier to do that. So, but those are great questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Delaney. Senator Garagiola.
I would say simply on the two questions, the medical marijuana, I've been supportive of that in the past as a Maryland legislator. Also on the civil marriage, I believe in marriage equality, and I've been supportive of that as well, and I'm happy that the governor signed it into law just about a month or so ago. With respect to states' rights versus federal rights, I do think it really depends on the issue. I mean, something like marriage actually is a state issue. Now, there's been federal laws that have been put in place that have tried to affect that. I would be in favor of repealing those federal laws. And I think in the spheres where states have generally been in charge of or in control, or areas that make sense for states, the federal government should defer. But in certain areas, if you're looking at national defense, or if you're looking at environmental issues, for instance, we've done a number of things in Maryland to reduce our reliance on certain types of energy sources. We've promoted green and renewable energies, whether it's wind, whether it's solar, whether it's geothermal. We've also put stringent requirements on some of our power plants in Maryland to reduce emissions. The problem is we're getting emissions from states west of us that are coming in and polluting our air, and we're having the health effects from that. I think something like that, and one of the things I'd like to do as a member of Congress, is some of the things that we have done in this state, we should try to nationalize those, because it really does affect an entire country. I mean, you know, smog doesn't just stay within one particular state. So when you're talking about environmental issues or food safety issues, there are a number of things where I think the federal government plays an important role and should play an important role. And the states where their sphere is, they should continue in that area. But there's always going to be, I think, a tension and a conflict between federal rights and states' rights.
Thank you, Senator Garagiola. Mr. Little?
Absolutely 100% support same-sex marriage. And I am a supporter of medical marijuana. I think, you know, when we talk about some of what we consider fundamental rights as human beings, the right to be self-determinative, the right, you know, to live our lives kind of in a way that makes us happy, as long as it doesn't affect our neighbors. You'll find that I'm probably most likely going to be supportive of initiatives of that nature, because this country's history has shown that, you know, we've had legislation in this country that has prohibited certain behaviors, interracial marriages, things of that nature. Just maybe how we treated African Americans in this country very early on in history. As a states' rights versus federal rights issue, I think we need to have some oversight as a federal government when we talk about things that affect interstate commerce, things that, you know, that affect, you know, national security, you know, access, ingress, egress, things of that nature. But I think, you know, as part of my campaign, I've always talked about, you know, this management from the grassroots up, that really the localities, you know, counties, cities, states should really be kind of self-determinative. And as a congressman, it's my job to make sure that I'm facilitating, you know, access to the things that those localities need in order to be independent and somewhat self-functioning. So I think as long as, you know, we don't have federal issues in jeopardy, I think all of those issues really should be reserved to the state.
Thank you, Mr. Little. Dr. Perron?
Thank you. So this question, I think, has three main components. The first component is state rights versus federal rights. I'm a staunch believer that the federal government should not interfere with states' abilities to do what the state feels is best for its citizens. Where the federal government has a key role is when those state decisions encroach on the civil liberties of its citizens. And we've frankly gone to a civil war over that before. So I think that's pretty clear where the states, you know, should have control over their own destiny. With respect to medical marijuana, you know, cocaine is also something that we prescribe. It's an anesthetic. When I was in the mountains of Peru doing a humanitarian mission with the Air Force, the locals would come in and they'd have cocoa leaves in their wounds. It's a great anesthetic. We hardly use it anymore, not because it's an illicit substance, but we don't use it anymore because our patients would get heart attack from it. So marijuana is not a benign drug. When we did a study in shock trauma years ago, we knew that over half the patients that came through shock trauma because of accidents were using marijuana. More people were using marijuana than alcohol, so it's not a benign drug. I don't believe in legalizing marijuana for the general population. But like any other therapeutic drug that we use, any of the narcotics, morphine, Percocet, you know, there's a role for it, and there's a reasonable role for it. So long as it's not used illicitly, so long as it's not abused, it can be very beneficial. And I know that a lot of our cancer patients and a lot of our terminal patients do benefit greatly from it. Now, the third point was the issue of same-sex marriage. You know, when I came back from Iraq, I thought it was shameful that soldiers that I had served with who were gay or lesbian could not have their loved ones attend our return home. This was before Don't Ask, Don't Tell. I'd saved American lives with these service members, but their loved one couldn't come to our return home. I'm glad that Don't Ask, Don't Tell is gone. When it comes to the issue of same-sex marriage, I would actually support the federal government moving towards allowing it and also being able to give our veterans survivor benefits and respecting the state's rights again to recognize those marriages.
Thank you, Dr. Perrin. Mr. Bailey?
Thank you. I would generally concur with what my rivals on the panel have said, and I have nothing to add.
Thank you, Mr. Bailey. Our next question will be for candidate Garagiola and will be asked by Robert Mick.
Some in Congress have sought to abolish the Appalachian Regional Commission. How important do you consider the ARC to the economic development in Western Maryland?
I would oppose abolition of that. I think it plays a critical role. It brings, you know, this area is not just one city or one county, it's a region. And I think that it needs to be looked at as a region. And we talked earlier about the north-south corridor. That's a vital link to the region. And I think if we look at it from a regional approach, when we talk about neighbors in Pennsylvania, West Virginia, and Maryland, I think there's a lot of synergies that can occur. And I think that the commission plays a vital role in that. It would be an outspoken opponent of trying to abolish it, and if anything, try to do more to make it, you know, give it even more ability to advocate for this area, and working with business, working with the community, working with local elected officials, as well as myself when I'm elected to Congress.
Thank you, Senator Garagiola. Mr. Little?
I mean, I support it, 100%, and I would fight against anyone who sought to, to abolish it. This again, is consistent with my theme that, it's really the locality's decision to be self-determinative. To really look at what's beneficial for their communities at the microscopic level as opposed to the macroscopic level, where you're looking at a top-down where you don't get to see all the little nuances that are at work, at the local level. So I think, it's incumbent upon all of us to make sure that to the extent that these organizations exist, that we do our best to support them. Because I'm going to, as a congressman, going to be relying on those people to make sure that I understand what those communities' needs are. And you can't refer back to that resource if it doesn't exist. So we need to support initiatives like that, whether it's with, dollars or, other types of resources to make sure that they're robust and that they have the things that they need to be prosperous. Because again, if we destroy the grassroots level, then there's nothing for us up top to work with. So we really need to make sure that those types of organizations have an opportunity to thrive and that they have the resources that they need to be prosperous.
Thank you, Mr. Little. Dr. Perrin, the question is about the Appalachian Regional Commission.
It's very much supportive of the commission. When you stop needing commissions like that, that means that the underlying communities that rely on it are also beginning to deteriorate. That means that your education systems are going to go because your jobs have gone, which means your hospitals are going to go, and that definitely is not the right way for the 6th District. This area is robust. We've got great colleges with obviously amazing students coming out of it. What we need to do, and what I will do as your congressman, is to make sure that we can increase the amount of jobs in this area, not only manufacturing jobs, but also bringing federal contracting jobs. The wonderful thing about Western Maryland is we're far enough, but we're just close enough too. So it's really a wonderful region to be in, a good area to be in, and it goes back to the questions with the north-south corridor and making sure that access to this area improves, and so I would very much be in favor of the commission.
Thank you, Dr. Perrin. Mr. Bailey?
Thank you. I agree that commissions like this are vital as communications between those represented and those who represent us. I'm very excited about the future of the 6th District. If you could look in this room here, you should give yourselves a hand. There are at least 250 people in this room, and I think there's another overflow room with closed-circuit TV down the hall. This is participation. This is communication. This is what we need. And Appalachian Commission is sort of the thing that would be an organization that would allow for that to be an effective tool of communication between government and those represented, which is what it's all about. And down the road, when this 6th District economy starts thriving, it'll be because of organizations like this. I would support it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bailey. Mr. Delaney?
I support the commission as well. And I put my support for the commission in the context of just my general view that a one-size-does-not-fit-all approach, if you will, for our whole country. So if you look at transportation needs, if you look at energy needs, what we need in the western part of the district is different than what we need on the Montgomery County part of the district. Similarly, the needs of California are different than the needs of Maryland. And that's a general approach that I have to thinking about our future. Every region of this country, and obviously the 6th District, which will be my charge, needs a strategy. And it needs a regional strategy to think about the strengths and opportunities in that particular region and how we fit into the larger economy. Increasingly, economies in this country are dividing themselves up into these super regions. For example, Washington and Boston, the Washington and to Boston corridor is actually considered to be the largest super region in the United States and the largest super regional economy in the world, for example. So how we think about economic development and how we think about the quality of our citizens' lives and how we think about the things that we care about have to be put into context of a regional strategy. And I think one of the things that commissions do like this is help communicate both ways, from the citizens to government and from the government to the citizens, what our plan is. Because I think this country does unbelievably well when we have a plan and when there's a consistent view of the plan between citizens and government. That's when we perform the best as a country. And I think commissions like this are incredibly important in putting ourselves in that position.
Thank you, Mr. Delaney. We will continue the Democratic Candidates Forum for Maryland's 6th District in a couple minutes. Thank you.
Allegany College of Maryland's network of 3 regional campuses puts an education close by. Plus, classes are offered at various times to fit your busy schedule. We are Allegany College of Maryland.
Our next question will be for candidate Little, and Latia will be asking the question. Latia Stanley, thank you.
Hello. What, if anything, should be done about illegal immigration in this country?
Thank you, Latia. 2 perspectives on illegal immigration. The first perspective is, what do we do with immigrants that we have here already? I think we need a comprehensive immigration plan to help identify who those people are and get them on the proper path to citizenship. It's my fundamental view that many of those people are already contributing to to our tax base, and because, again, of all of the wars that we've been engaged in for the past 30 years really do serve a vital human resources role as, I don't want to say replacements, but as stand-ins, for those that we've lost over the past 30 years. But I also think it's important for us to secure our borders. I think, and one of the ways we do that is by bringing our troops home, allowing them to maybe, stand as people at the border to make sure that those that are enter under the conditions that the United States wants them to enter under. I think, this country was founded by, a collection of immigrants. People want to come here because you can survive and you can thrive, and, this is a place where dreams are made every single day, even despite our current economic condition. But I think, first we need to have a comprehensive immigration policy that addresses those that are here, and I think we need to secure our borders to make sure that we control the flow of those that come afterward, and not just, our Mexican border, but our Canadian border as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Little. Dr. Paran?
So when we talk about the issue with undocumented aliens and the work that they do in this country, I think we have to look at it from the perspective of a human rights issue. Often the undocumented workers are paid 1/3, maybe even 1/5 of what minimum wage is. They're not afforded the same safety on the job that our unions have fought so hard for. It's frankly inhumane. And also what that does is that creates a fair environment in terms of competitiveness for those jobs, where the employers are more apt to employ someone that they can pay a lot less for and not have to worry about their safety. So what we have to do as a country, I think, if we can document people that come into this country, it's not a path to citizenship. Look, I've walked that path to citizenship, and it's not an easy path. And the entire way you prove your love for this country and your desire to serve. But we document these aliens who come in. We allow them to enter the workforce at the same minimum wages for the same safety, take the lack of the fairness off the table, make it fair. It also allows us a security standpoint to make sure that these folks coming in are not fugitives from their home countries, they're not with the drug cartels. It allows for our safety and security as well. But this is the humane approach to it, this is the American approach to it. Listen, we never had to put walls around our country to keep people from leaving. This is still the greatest country in the world, and people still want to come here. And we need to make sure that we continue to be welcoming and open, but we need to make sure that we protect ourselves, and we need to make sure that we protect all human life in this country.
Thank you, Dr. Perron. Mr. Bailey, the question is concerning illegal immigration in this country.
All right, first of all, I want everyone to remember that these are mostly, on the most part, good people. These are people who want to come to this country to do best for their families. And I got to tell you, in my 5 years as a felony jury trial lawyer in the Public Defender's Office of Hagerstown, Washington County, where I live, I've never had a Mexican client. These are God-fearing, good, hard-working people, and I'm proud to call them neighbors. At the same time, we should focus on a controlled, even-handed approach to provide a path to citizenship for the estimated 12 million who are here already, so that we can have a proper census and apply proper resources to the infrastructure and the schools, because they're here already, leaning on our infrastructure. We need to provide for them. And we have to remember that these are human beings and our neighbors. I'd be proud to call them neighbors. And we need to have a path to citizenship for them. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bailey. Mr. Delaney?
Thank you. So there's a principled answer to this question, and there's a practical answer to this question. As a matter of principle, as long as this is the country that celebrates freedom, as long as this is the country that celebrates equality, and as long as this is the country that celebrates opportunity, we will always have people that want to come here. Which is why we need comprehensive immigration reform in this country. Because this country was founded by immigrants. They built the country. We're all descendants of someone who immigrated to this country at some point in our history. And we have to recognize this is part of the American narrative. And we have to make sure it's done in a fair and equitable way. As a practical matter, we do have a problem in this country right now. And the solution is not to deport 12 million people who are working hard, raising families, have children. That is just not going to happen. It's not the right thing to do, and it's not the practical thing to do. But we have to have a national immigration policy reform, and it has to be done in the context of the fact that several states in this country have legitimate and very difficult border issues, where we have a porous border in some situations, and it's putting huge pressure on those local municipalities and law enforcement in those areas. At the same time, we have so many people who want to come to this country and start jobs and stay here after receiving a university education that is second to none, and we don't allow it to happen. So that's the problem with our immigration system right now. We let people in and put huge amounts of pressure on certain states, and we don't allow the best and the brightest to continue to come here, and we don't allow the best and brightest to stay here after they receive the finest education in the world. And it's a very, very significant problem, and it gets to not only who we are as a country, but it really gets to the economic issues, because we have to embrace the immigration trends that will continue to exist in this country in order to change some of the economic trends we've experienced over the last 20 years.
Thank you, Mr. Delaney. Senator Garagiola?
Thank you. I mean, look, we're a nation of immigrants, and it's unfortunate that this is an issue that's been demonized. It's unfortunate that this is an issue that's become very partisan, because if you look over the last several decades under prior administrations, Reagan administration, and prior to that even, but even during the Reagan administration, you had bipartisan immigration reform that occurred. It was Democrats and Republicans that worked together to do that. And unfortunately, we haven't seen that occurring at the federal level. Clearly, as was mentioned, we've got 12 million undocumented immigrants that are in this country today. If they want to pay taxes, if they want to get an education for themselves, if they want to become citizens, I think we create a path for citizenship. But if they're fugitives from other countries, well, then they need to be deported. We also need to work in comprehensive immigration reform to secure our borders. As was mentioned by other colleagues up here, there are greater challenges in certain other states. We need to deal with both those that may come in the future and how we address it, but we also need to deal with those that are here today. And frankly, if we just deported those 12 million immigrants that are here, that would have a devastating impact on our economy. We also do, and I agree with what was said by another colleague, we do need to address the wages and the safety and the health care or lack of health care that's provided to these workers. It's creating a gray market economy, essentially, where you have employers that are hiring people at substandard wages and are essentially exploiting them. And that's very unfortunate, and I think that it's wrong.
Thank you, Senator Garagiola. We have our next question will be for candidate Dr. Perron, and Mr. Kolowitz will ask it.
The health insurance reform bill of 2010 remains a polarizing policy. If you had been in Congress during the bill's consideration, would you have supported it? If you support repeal, how would you address the millions of Americans that lack health insurance today?
Thank you, Cameron. So I probably would have voted for it twice or 3 times if I could have. So let's talk about what's important in this health care bill. I could go on 5 minutes on this topic or 10. So I think the biggest issue with the health care bill is the lack of understanding by the opposition. This thing was not only allowed some basic things that have already kicked in, like you can't be kicked off your policy because of pre-existing conditions. It allows children to stay on their parents' policies until the age of 26, which is very important for the younger generation. But it does some really, really critical things as well. It establishes what is a minimum for health insurance in this country. So for something to be called health insurance, it has to meet certain minimum requirements, which is important. Because we used to have hazard insurance that companies would sell as health insurance to their employees, and then they would say they have benefits. That didn't really work. So what this insurance does is that it encourages preventative care. And most importantly, it encourages preventative care for women in this country. And what we're seeing right now is the assault on women's rights and women's civil liberties and women's reproductive rights in this country. And it's a direct result because the health care bill bolsters those rights and protects those rights, and it encourages those rights, and that's crucial. The health care bill also goes a step further and then creates these exchanges that then allow people to be competitive, that allows for a competitive market so that we can make our healthcare industry into a healthcare system. Because frankly, right now, we don't have a healthcare system. And what we need to do with Medicare then is to allow people to buy into Medicare starting at 55 and slowly expand Medicare until we have a single payer system in this country. And that's the way we need to work. Now, there are young people who can still choose not to buy health insurance and they're going to pay tax for it, but you know what? My wife and I, we see kids that come in that are malnourished every day into Children's Hospital because they have to dilute down their formulas. That's not the way to go for this country.
Thank you, Dr. Perron. Mr. Bailey?
Thank you. I agree that the health care insurance plan was a good plan. I think that the Affordable Health Care Act is a good idea, should be supported, but it won't really work until the other shoe drops and we provide a single provider service in this country, an option, so that everyone can be covered. That's when it'll work. Apart from that, I don't think I have anything further to add. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bailey. Mr. Delaney?
Yes, I would have voted for the legislation. I think in 20 years we will look back at this legislation, and I think there's a reasonable chance this is one of the president's greatest achievements. And I think we'll look back and we'll look at this issue of universal coverage the same way we look back at other issues in this country and wonder what we were discussing. Because I think this is a fundamental right, health care in this country. And I think as a civilized society that wants to move forward and not look backwards, we have to embrace universal coverage. I think, having said that, there is still a lot of work to do on health care, because we still have a situation where healthcare costs are rising dramatically. It's putting enormous pressure on individuals, average Americans, and it's putting enormous pressure on our economy. And we all know there are things that we need to do to improve the healthcare delivery mechanism in this country to make it more efficient, to meet the needs of patients, deliver the level of care that they require, but do it in a way where fraud is eliminated and we maximize efficiency in the system. And that's something that I want to work on as a member of Congress. And I think we're actually entering an era with what's happening with genetic research and the ability to be predictive as to people's likelihood of getting diseases and this kind of systems medicine approach to how people will manage their health care, where we actually can make major advances in terms of the quality of people's lives and doing it in a way that lowers health care costs. And I think that's a wonderful bottom line for us to embrace as a country. And I think the government, you know, consistent with my view that there's a clear role for government in certain areas, and I think government needs to really lead the way in reforming how healthcare is delivered in this country so that it can be efficient, it can meet patients' expectations and citizens' expectations, and do it in a way that gets costs under control so that our economy can continue to grow. Because healthcare is one of the, if you look back at our spending as a society across the last 10 years, healthcare obviously is gobbling up an increasingly large percentage of where our money is going.
Thank you, Mr. Delaney. Senator Garagiola, the question regards healthcare insurance reform.
Yeah, I would have also voted for the Affordable Care Act. I mean, there's a number of components of it that have already been put in place, the limitation on pre-existing exclusions, the ability for young adults while they're going to school to stay on their parents' policy. I also believe in the aspect of it that deals with the individual responsibility. I mean, right now, we are all paying a hidden tax in our health care premiums that we're paying, whether it's through Medicare, whether it's through our employer, whether we're getting it in the individual market. We're paying a hidden tax on our health care right now because those that don't have insurance, those that don't have access to health care coverage, they're using the most expensive setting for their basic preventive health care, and that's the emergency department. And that's the last setting you want someone to go to. It'd be far more better for them to go to their physician and get the basic preventive health care up front in a less costly setting. We pay for that. We pay for those that are uninsured who go to the emergency department. And this legislation, the Affordable Care Act, does address that. I think it's a good first step. I think we need to make greater investment in chronic disease management. There's cost savings that can be found there. I think there can be greater investment in preventive health care services. There's a number of things that we've done actually in the state of Maryland on that front, and hopefully we can do at the federal level as well. And then on the health IT side, there's great opportunity to get not only better outcomes with health information technology and interoperability between the hospital, the physician, the pharmacist, but there's incredible cost savings that can occur as well when you have communications across the healthcare spectrum. So I think the Affordable Care Act is a good first step. I think there's much more that needs to be done, and I'd like to move the ball even further forward on healthcare reform if I'm elected to Congress. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Senator Garagiola. Mr. Little?
I would have voted for Obamacare. And I'll say Obamacare because I don't want to demonize the Affordable Care Act. Yes, call it whatever you want to call it. It's important that everyone in this country have access to health care. And it started not just with President Obama, but many years ago, when I was about 17 years old, I spent part of my summer at Cold Spring Harbor out on Long Island doing genetics research, genetic fingerprinting, so to help identify people's propensity toward particular diseases. And that was, to some degree, what insurance companies use to determine the premiums of people, when they come in looking for a policy. And that's one of the reasons why we have such high, medical care costs, because insurance companies evaluate their potential clients based on their propensity to have certain diseases. That's something that we need to fix in this country. The other good problem that the Affordable Care Act presents is an absence of doctors, enough doctors to actually provide treatment to the people that come into these facilities that will be stood up at the local level. And I think one of the ways that we cure that is to offer opportunities for students. And we introduce them to this concept at a very early age, 8, 9, 10 years old. If you as a student want to become a doctor and practice in the community that you live in now, the government will either subsidize a great percentage or pay completely for your education so that you can serve the community that you work in and backfill what we're missing now. Yes, people use the emergency room, but oftentimes it's because they don't have time to get to the clinics that are available. And I can tell you, as someone who uses military treatment facilities, if I get sick and I walk into a military treatment facility and I don't have an appointment, I have to wait. And if I have to wait beyond business hours, that means I get sent to the emergency room. That's a rising cost that we don't recognize in this country, and that's something that we can fix.
Thank you, Mr. Little. I think this is a good time for our last break. We'll come back for one more question and the closing statements of our candidates. Thank you.
Allegany College of Maryland is all about quality. In a recent survey, almost all ACM graduates found their classroom instruction to be of high quality, and they felt they were well prepared to start their career. We're Allegany College of Maryland.
And we're back here at Allegany College, and our last question will be asked by Katie Dignan, and we'll go to Mr. Bailey.
We applaud you for running for public office. Many argue that American politics have become divisive. What would you do to work together in Congress, Democrats and Republicans, to solve the nation's problems?
That's a good question. It seems to me that lately we've seen great gridlock in Congress, in the sense that these giant bills with all these riders attached seems to bring us to a halt because everybody votes on party lines. I think the only answer can be that you start off by working more days, not less, to break down these big bills into smaller sections, working with the ones you find common ground on first, developing a working relationship so that you can reach the harder ones later. You get a lot more done. We would give the appearance that Congress actually functions, but I think the era of the big bill is over, and it's important that we work together to further the interests of the working families of the 6th District. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bailey. Mr. Delaney?
So, over 300 members of Congress have signed pledges giving their vote away to special interest groups. So they show up in Congress and they look at the American flag and they look across this great country and think about all the people in this country who they're supposed to represent. But they've decided, no matter what circumstances arise, no matter what happens to the country, no matter what event they have to deal with, no matter what's at stake, they've decided to give their pledge to someone. And they've done it for a relatively small amount of money. It's like picking up dirty coins on the floor. It's terrible. And that's the problem with our government right now. And ultimately, the only people who can make a difference as it relates to that issue is the American people. The American people have to demand that their representatives are doing it for the right reasons. It seems to me when people go to Congress, they vote for one of three reasons. They either vote because they think it's the right thing to do, right? They look at what's in front of them, and they make a decision based on what's in the best interest of their constituents and the best interest of the country, depending upon the issue. That's one reason people vote in Congress. The second reason they vote in Congress is to get reelected. And the third reason they vote is to climb up the power machine in their party. And what we have to do as a country is we have to move more people into the first category and get them out of the second two. Because the second two have nothing to do what's good for the American people. We should not allow people to go to Congress and sign pledges. They should only make a pledge to do what's in the best interest of the citizens of the United States. And what we need to do as a country is we need to elect more independent-minded people. That doesn't mean they can't be strong Democrats or strong Republicans. I'm a strong Democrat because I believe there's a role for government to improve the lives of citizens, to make sure we have a level and fair playing field, and to take care of those left behind. But that doesn't mean that I will vote based on special interests. And that's what we have to do. And I'm very optimistic that the American people will actually take this issue on and put different people in Congress. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Delaney. Mr. Garagiola?
Thank you. Actually, I mean, partisanship is an okay thing. We've had partisanship since the days of Jefferson and Adams. It's the hyper-partisanship where nothing can get done that is a problem. You know, when President Clinton was in office and the Republicans took control in 1994, I was a staff member on Capitol Hill working for a congressman from New Jersey. We got welfare reform done. We passed a Balanced Budget Act that actually put this nation on the path of surpluses. That was Republicans and Democrats working together. As a Maryland State Senate Majority Leader, there's partisan arguments that we have in Annapolis. But I will tell you, there's also a lot of things that we do in a very bipartisan way in Annapolis. And many of my Republican colleagues, some of which you'll hear here later today, would tell you that there's an environment in the Maryland Senate that I've helped foster as the Senate Majority Leader where we actually get things done that are good for the state. We need to do that at the federal level. Another thing that I think we need to reform is how the redistricting is done. Now, this district is a district that a Republican and a Democrat could win. But unfortunately, most districts across the country are not like that. And so what you have is you have a district that's very safe Republican and districts that are very safe Democratic. And that what ends up occurring is the election becomes the primary. And so you get a polarization that occurs in Congress because of that, because those on the left, you know, are focused on, you know, just winning that primary, and those on the right are focusing on winning that primary. And you have even a bigger chasm between the two parties. My son's in 8th grade, and I liken it to an 8th grade dance where the girls will be standing on one side of the dance floor and the boys will be standing on another. No one's coming in the middle. I've demonstrated in Annapolis for the last 10 years that I'm one who can come together, bring people together for common sense, practical solutions, and I'd like to do that as a member of Congress.
Thank you, Senator Garagiola. Mr. Little, the question revolves around divisiveness in politics.
I think the environment of, you know, this divisiveness where, you know, hyper Democrats, hyper Republicans, all at the expense of everyone that we're elected to serve and to protect. There's no place for it. For 14 years, I've volunteered in this state through different administrations, both Republican and Democrat, and I've done so promoting advocacy for those that needed it. And I don't think I've ever once had a conversation about which party I was affiliated with. I think when you identify a problem and you show a willingness to help find a solution, that's where the conversation starts. That's where we all start our daily lives. Very rarely do we have engagements with one another where we talk about whether you're a Republican or Democrat. We do it in the workplace. We do it in the supermarket. We do it with our children. Unbeknownst to them, they've probably taken opposing positions for one reason or another. But it's a fight we have every day. But in an effort to make sure that we actually resolve the problem, we sit down at the table, we figure out what's going to start, allowing us to work together. And I think that's the way we approach how we address our problems in this country. And I'll tell you just kind of a funny aside. Thursday, I went to the Republican or Tea Party forum, and I was the only Democrat there, and I was booed a lot. But I'll tell you, even though people booed me for my position, they were happy to come and greet me at the end because they were grateful that I was at least willing to come and start the conversation. And I think that that's what's important. You can boo me up front, but be happy with me that I'm at least there willing to have the conversation with you, knowing that despite what this woman said, my middle name is not Daniel, and that was not the Lion's Den.
Dr. Perron?
I thought you'd be our St. Peter. So, ladies and gentlemen, I believe I'm uniquely qualified to represent the 6th District. I grew up in the D.C. suburbs. I've worked and lived in Montgomery County, and now I live in Frederick County, and I work out west. I work at the VA in Martinsburg as an independent contractor. And when I always tell them that I'm from Western Maryland, they go, "Oh, you're from Cumberland or Oakland?" And I tell them, no, I'm just from west of everything else in Maryland, not west of here, per se. But, our president said in the State of the Union that people are cynical of government because of the corrosive influence of money in politics. And frankly, I refuse to accept that our choices for this seat are between entrenched political power and entrenched money power. I fear that they'll plug and play into the same broken system in Washington that's been corrupted by careerism, money, and partisan anger. So I do make a pledge. I do make one pledge, and I will make this pledge as your congressman, that I will only serve you, that I will never be beholden to any special interest. I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States, as I have sworn to do for the last 13 years, and I will strive for the greater good of our nation. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Perron. That brings us to the end of our questioning by these fabulous students. I think they did a great job. They obviously worked hard. And this brings us to our close, which each candidate will be able to speak for 2 minutes and tell us why we should vote for them on April the 3rd. We'll begin with Mr. Delaney.
I also want to thank the students. These were clearly the best questions that we've had, and I'm sure my colleagues would agree. Not surprising, actually. So the real question is, what do we want for our future? And that's the fundamental question we have to ask ourselves. For the last 20 years, we've watched the standard of living of the average American deteriorate. And we've known as a country exactly why this is happening. This is happening because of globalization and technology. Two things that we will not be able to reverse. We cannot put that toothpaste back in the tube. However, we've also known that there are things we can be doing as a country to reverse these trends. Investing in our infrastructure, which we talked about here today. Talking about a comprehensive immigration reform, which we've covered. Comprehensive energy policy that could lay the groundwork for the next great employer in this country, and an employer that will create a higher standard of living than what we're seeing now. Increasing the standard of living of the service workers in this country, which are here to stay, and they're an important part of our economy. Bringing manufacturing back to the best we can based on globalization and technology, and continuing to nurture the knowledge class of this country, which has been one of the fastest growing segment of our economy. There are specific policies we need to do, and this is not about economics. This is about American values. This is about protecting the average American, the person that built this country, saved this country, and saved the world. And I believe I'm the right person to do it. I've created over 1,000 jobs in Montgomery County from scratch. I understand exactly how to create jobs. I've worked with over 5,000 small businesses around this country, which create 60% of the jobs in this country. The Obama administration has given us an award for how we've done this in an ethical and responsible way, serving underserved communities. And most importantly, I'm doing this from the heart. I'm doing this for the right reason. I talked earlier about how there's three kind of frames that people put up when they make decisions. I promise you that I will make decisions for the right reasons. This is why the Washington Post has endorsed me for my ideas and my view of the future. This is why President Clinton has endorsed me, and this is why I really want your support, and I will do this for the right reason. That is my promise.
Thank you, Mr. Delaney. Senator Garagiola.
Thank you. This is a very, very important election. I have to tell you, I've got 3 young children, and I'm very concerned about whether or not it's going to be better for them than it has been for me. And as I've traveled the district from Montgomery County out to Garrett County, I've heard that refrain from many people. People are very concerned. Is this country adrift? Are our better days ahead of us? Well, I think our better days can be ahead of us. But it comes down to who we have in office and the decisions that are made. And I think that I'm the best candidate to defeat Bartlett if he ends up becoming the Republican nominee in November. But more importantly, I think I'm the best person to represent the 6th District. I've been a champion in Annapolis over the years for education. And that's why the Garrett County and the Allegany County teachers, as well as the state teachers, have endorsed my candidacy. I've been a champion for the working class, and I want to do that at the federal level as well. That's why Progressive Maryland, the AFL-CIO, and dozens of other labor organizations have endorsed my candidacy. I've been a champion for public safety, and that's why the firefighters and the Fraternal Order of Police have endorsed my candidacy. They're endorsing my candidacy for Congress because they know the things that I've done in Annapolis are the things that I'm going to do in Washington. I've been a big proponent for green energy. There is so much more that we can do on that front. And talk about job creation. 2,000 jobs have been created in Maryland in the last 5 years in the green tech sector. We can have the opportunity to create 10,000 jobs. And that's just in Maryland alone. I've gotten endorsements from the League of Conservation Voters and the Sierra Club for my work in those areas. Veterans organizations, small business organizations have endorsed my candidacy because of what I've done as a champion on veterans issues and what we need to do for those veterans that are returning home from Iraq and Afghanistan. It's easy to send the troops overseas, but oftentimes when they come back, they're forgotten about. Well, I've not done that in Annapolis, and I won't do that as a member of Congress as well. I believe that I'm the best person positioned to represent this area. There's change that we need. We need to move this country in the right direction for the next generation. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Garagiola. Mr. Little.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're at a crossroads in this country. For 20 years, this district has not had an adequate representative of its citizens. And I'll tell you that for 14 years, I have volunteered my time. I'm an antitrust attorney by training, and I do that full time. But I thought it was important for me to give more of myself and to do so without cost to those that I was serving. I did it by advocating at the state level and at the county level. I've done so with women's health issues. 14 years volunteering with Komen because women's health issues have been important to me. When our founding fathers considered our Congress, they wanted it to be a Congress of citizen legislators, attorneys who would leave their shingle and go to Congress and advocate on behalf of their communities, bakers who would stop making dough to go help rise up the people of this country. That's what I've been doing for 14 years. And I've done so because it's important to me. It's important that the people that I live with feel like they have someone that they could rely on. People that could come to me and ask me random questions about how they can address particular problems. This particular seat, this is a power play. But what people don't realize is that the power is with us. It's the people that come out and vote, the people that know what they want from their leader in this district. And I would submit to you that what I've been doing for the past 14 years is what I'm asking you to allow me to continue to do on your behalf as your congressman. I do so out of love of my community and for no other reason. This has been a grassroots campaign from the very beginning, And regardless of what happens, I want you to know that you have an advocate who will work for you tirelessly to make sure that you have the things that you need. My name is Ron Little. Thank you.
Dr. Perron.
Thank you. So when I'm down in Montgomery County, new part of the 6th, I try to explain to them what life will be like next year if Roscoe Bartlett is their representative. And sadly, I don't think they quite get it yet. But, you know, we do here in the old 6th this district. We get it. Now, you've learned today that the 5 of us up here share a lot of our ideas and issues. But I just want you to think beyond the issues for a second. Think about the differences between the 5 of us up on stage. For example, I'm a doctor and these gentlemen are all lawyers. Now, doctors, I'm trained to look at facts and evidence and act. Lawyers, they're trained to look at evidence and argue. But there's one difference that you should all really, really consider when it comes to the fall election, is that which one of us up here has the personal story and the record of public service that can withstand the attack from the Republicans this fall? Because it's going to be coming. Now, you've seen it in your mailboxes, you've seen it on TV. While the 2 other major candidates in this race have been going after each other for the last 10 weeks, we've been talking about the issues. I'm proud that when Governor Howard Dean endorsed my candidacy, he looked at the race and he said, Milad, you're the only Democratic candidate who can withstand the Republicans' attack and beat Roscoe Bartlett in November. Now, friends, it's our time. It's our time to have a representative that we can be proud of. It's our time to have a congressman who shares our vision for the future, who shares our values, and who'll listen to us. My Western Democrat friends, it's our time. I look for your support on April 3rd and on to November. Thank you very much for being here. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Perron. And finally, Mr. Bailey.
I want to say that we're all very excited to see this huge turnout today. Everywhere we go, we've seen enormous numbers of people. There's something afoot. There's something in the air. I think the Democrats are going to take this seat back. The question is, which one are you going to put forward? It's a matter of what you feel in your gut and you feel in your heart when you've heard what we said. If you chose Charles Bailey as your representative, you have a true partisan for the 6th District. We have national issues, international issues, true. But I'm going in there to fight for you here. You need jobs now. We need a public works program now. My big idea is to reopen the CO Canal, its entire length, the backbone of the 6th District, as an international tourist attraction like they do in Europe. If you want to go see gobarging.com, you'll see what I'm talking about. They're making a lot of money over there off of these old industrial barges. We'll make it into a tourist attraction. Just opening it will create thousands of jobs. But it's a smart investment, not like paving a highway where the project ends and the jobs ends. This will spin off hundreds, thousands of jobs in all kinds of public recreation. And secondly, ladies and gentlemen, as a public defender for many years, I saw what this man-made economic disaster has done to those least among to withstand hardship among us. I'm talking about the single moms. I'm a single parent. I know it's tough, but it's tougher for single moms because they make 70 cents on the dollar for their male colleagues. We need to pass the Equal Rights Amendment in this country. We've learned recently that corporations are considered equal citizens among us. It's time we recognize that women are equal citizens among us. Charles Bailey for Congress. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Bailey. I thank all of you, our impassioned speakers, our Democratic candidates. I think they did a great job. Anybody want to? Yeah, I thought so. I thank our listeners. I know I learned a lot. I thank the state and local governments class at Allegany College, the Beall Institute of Frostburg State University, especially the students here that worked so hard to prepare and organize this event, the placards and the questions, the Garrett and Allegany County Central Committees, and my favorite, the Garrett County Democratic Club. I know there's some members here from Garrett County. And finally, to WCBC Radio, AM 1270, and its sponsors. I think we had a great time. We learned a lot, and we thank you so much.
You're watching the Allegany College of Maryland's state and local government classes Maryland 6th Congressional District Democrat Debate, held March 24th at the Cumberland campus of Allegany College of Maryland, in conjunction with Frostburg State University's J. Glenn Beall Jr. Institute for Public Affairs and the Allegany College of Maryland Center for Continuing Education, in cooperation with the Garrett County Democrat Club and the Garrett and Allegany County Central Committees.
A solid education is essential in today's workplace, and Allegany College of Maryland offers over 90 career and transfer programs that will help you build a lasting career. We're Allegany College of Maryland.